Am I up there?
You might ask, what would it take to get Gordy Little out of his easy chair at 7 o'clock at night on the 11th day of, what is this, April, during what we hope is not going to be a massive snowstorm? And I'll give you the answer. Calvin and I are down here tonight to talk about the future of Catholic education here in the North Country. A project that has many people buzzing, and I hope many of those people will buzz with their snow tires down to join us tonight. Next to me is a guy who's familiar to anybody who knows anything about anything in the North Country, Lefty Tessier. Warren, how are you tonight?
I'm very good, Gordy. Just great to be here.
We were looking in the bleachers. It's about 15 minutes before this program is set to begin, and there weren't quite 100 people here, but we hope they will show up later, because this is a very worthy cause and something that we've got to get started on now before it's too late.
Right.
Explain why we're here and what the plan is.
Well, I think, first of all, the weather may keep a few people away, but fortunately for us, we've scheduled 2 evenings, so there can be some makeup in the second evening, which is going to happen on April the 25th. As to the issue at hand, it's a huge undertaking on the part of the 4 parishes in Plattsburgh, and 3 in Plattsburgh and St. Alexander's and Morrisonville, to take a good look at Catholic education in the Plattsburgh area, and to try to develop some recommendations that would be useful to the pastors and to the diocese and to the kids and their parents as to the future of Catholic education. And we started in this past summer, and this is just one of the steps in the process as we go through meeting with all kinds of constituents, the stakeholders, and giving everybody an opportunity to tell us where they're coming from.
I've been through, I won't call them wars, but a lot of very heated meetings down through the years as to what we're going to do to keep our schools viable. As I've said before, as most of our viewers may be aware, you graduated from the old Our Lady of Victory Academy.
Yes, I did.
Way back when, 1955?
If we're telling those tales, yes. That's the year.
And one of the low points of my radio career was covering the news conference the night when they announced that school would close. I don't remember what year that was, but that was a
in the late
time.
60s, yes.
In the late 60s. Mm-hmm. Oh, Calvin remembers 1969. And that was kind of a dark year for the Fox Hill crowd.
I'm sure it was. It certainly was a sad year for me, and certainly a lot of the alumni. But I really don't know all of the pieces to that puzzle back then. But this is an entirely different effort. That there must have been some reason that was necessary. This is not being motivated by those same kinds of factors. It's being more motivated to address the future, because the status quo just can't be maintained for many reasons, and a lot of the reasons we'll present tonight, and we've been discussing in committee to try to make some recommendations that will be acceptable to everyone.
And there'll be a great many people here tonight, and others, excuse me, in the community who are very interested in the outcome. Not just Catholics, but people in the public school systems who have to think of what would happen if all these kids from the Catholic schools suddenly ended up on their rolls.
Oh, I'm sure that's true, yes. There are two sides to that, good and bad, But the decisions and the direction and all that have very far-reaching implications, and we want to do as much as we can to collect enough information and feelings and be sensitive to all the issues, and so that the committee itself can make some good recommendations.
A lot of the movers and shakers in our communities have been closely connected with Catholic education for a long time. You're one of them. I'll never forget the time period involved when they decided what to do with MAI and St. John's, and it took a long time to make the decision that is ultimately what this school has turned out to be.
Seton Catholic, that's right. I, of course, again, I wasn't in the area at that time. That must have been fun, St. John's and MAI getting together, but they proved it could be done, and as a result, you have an outstanding Catholic high school in this community, and that's great.
Calvin and I were just discussing before we rolled the cameras tonight about some of the issues about families wanting to make choices about where to send their kids to school, and this whole idea of a voucher system, something that we've talked about and promoted for a long time. And there have been some great choices in the North Country in terms of where to send your kids and how to get them educated.
Yes.
And I saw some television interviews earlier tonight about some school system, I'm not going to mention, where one of the administrators left, and a young woman is saying, well, next year is the year I homeschool my son. And it makes me sad to see things like that happen. Then I was pleased earlier this evening to see the local television station, WPTZ Channel 5, promoting this event here tonight. So at least if the people aren't here, we'll have some of their spirit and their goodwill with us.
And I think, and as I said, they'll have another opportunity. I think the important thing is that people do want a choice, and regardless of what decisions they make, and it's good to have a competitive situation. The Catholic schools provide that, but even more importantly for people in this area that are in the parishes and are Catholic parents and so on, they have a right to choose to educate their children in this kind of a system, and so we're here really to try to secure that for the future for them.
Just thinking as you were talking, remember I have to go and read at St. Alexander School to the kids tomorrow morning at some point during the day, and I always enjoy that. So what's the plan for tonight?
Well, tonight we're going to present some reports, some brief information, and then ask the group to go downstairs into the cafeteria and to have roundtable discussions centered around a couple of specific questions that we've asked them to address regarding Catholic education, and give reports on that and get feedback to the study committee. And then we'll repeat this exercise in 2 weeks and do it again with different questions. And it's all with the idea of making sure that everybody's voice gets an opportunity to be heard. Part of the process will include a questionnaire that we'll mail to all the parents or all the parishioners, essentially, and as well as focus groups to just get as much information as we can. We believe that the more information we have and the more facts we're working with, the better the recommendations can be for us.
This isn't the only place in the world where they're talking about the future of a Catholic education, because we just read in a recent edition of the North Country Catholic that they're going through the same discussion phase up in Watertown, for example.
Watertown is doing the same thing. Syracuse finished a couple of years ago. The Diocese of Syracuse, and in many places across the country, it's already happened. The area that I relocated from, Elmira, New York, which is in the Rochester Diocese, actually did some studies and made some serious recommendations about their school systems 15 and 20 years ago. So we're just doing that same kind of thing, only now is a great time to be doing it.
Will there be talk tonight of possibly combining some of these local schools?
No, there's been actually that hasn't even been the emphasis of the committee. Those are the kinds of rumors and things that you hear. The committee hasn't really gotten down to deliberating what kind of recommendations they'd make regarding schools or the staffing or what's buildings and to choose how to approach this whole system, because we're still in that fact-finding mission, which and that's the purpose of this evening. So there'll be no discussion about, there could be questions, but there will be no deliberation over choices or what have you.
Well, we hope that a lot of good information goes into one end of the horn,
yes,
and a lot of really great boiled down information comes out of the other end. We can't wait to see what happens tonight. Before we even get started, I want to personally thank you for your involvement in the Catholic schools, and I know you've been close to it for all of your adult life and beforehand.
Long time, yes. I was a high school principal in a Catholic high school many years ago, and I have my children went through high school, K through high school myself. So I went through a Catholic college, and so I'm into it, and it's because I believe that it's a great system, a great way to educate your kids, and I believe in giving them a faith-based opportunity, and that's just where I'm coming from, and so I'm delighted to be able to help out in any way to make a contribution.
We're delighted too. I was sitting there in my easy chair, and Father Grotto called me one night and said, "Would you like to do a little television show over there?" And I called Calvin, and the rest is history. Let's see what happens at the other end. Lefty,
Okay.
Thanks so much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You may know me as the executive director of the YMCA. Those of you that do know me are probably wondering why I'm here, and those of you that don't know me will learn to wonder why I'm here. The reason I'm here, actually, Warren Tessier, because I'm not affiliated with any parish here, they were looking for somebody that knows nothing, and my name kept coming up as someone who knew nothing. So I did actually do 9 years of Catholic education at St. Patrick's School in Port Henry. If you don't believe me, you can look at my knuckles. You'll know. And interestingly enough, I made it all the way through 8th grade. There was no Catholic school in Port Henry. But my little brother was in the last graduating class from St. Patrick's. So they got through me, but they couldn't stand it any longer after he got through there. But the reason that we're here, of course, are all the things that my parents saw that was valued enough in Catholic education in terms of class size and structures and all the things we're going to talk about tonight. But if you think about when we went to the Catholic school, when I went to the Catholic school, you know, there were 8 nuns and 1 lay person. And now you have 8 lay people and a nun, and they might not even be wearing the gear, you know. It hardly is fair, is it? So you don't even know when they're around. We had some great nuns. I remember Sister Phillip in 4th grade. She was the best softball player in school. And she was a big woman, and she could hit a softball farther than any of us, and you'd see her rounding the bases with her habit flying in the air. And then there was Sister Gabriel in 6th grade, who was quite athletic, because she could kick a garbage can the length of the hallway, if properly induced. The only thing, you know, because Catholic education stopped for me after 8th grade, you had to go to the real school after that, and the biggest disservice I think that the nuns did to us guys was that when we got to 9th grade, we had no idea how to put a jock strap on. Now, I'd have no idea how to transition from a jock strap to the invocation. Father Chris, could you have a prayer for us, please?
I don't know how to transition either, so. We come together as children of God. We come together as students of the great teacher, Jesus Christ, and we make our beginning in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty and ever-living God, we thank you for bringing us here together at this time when we deliberate and discuss Catholic education in our city of Plattsburgh and in our surrounding community. We ask you to be with us as we remember our children, remember our teachers, remember the students who have come before us and those who will come in the years ahead, that they and our prosperity will continue to grow in the love of the Lord through Catholic education. Through the intercession of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, St. John Neumann, may we continue to grow in love for each other and continue to grow the great Catholic tradition of education in our area. And we ask this and all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
And please forgive Kevin Killeen for anything he may say tonight. I mentioned that I'm not affiliated with any of the parishes here, but I do have, in terms of my resume, quite a family background in Catholicism. Have a priest. My Uncle Pat was a priest. 2 of my father's brothers were priests. My Uncle Pat died in a flash flood in Mexico. And actually my Uncle Jim was a bishop at St. Patrick's Cathedral, was assistant to the vicar, who was Cardinal Cook at the time, and was, I think, the first Navy chaplain ever to be named a bishop. And I was an altar boy, and therefore I thought I was a priest. But I asked, because I didn't know who was going to be here tonight, said what different generations will be represented, and I only got to ask one question, and then I'll know the answer to the question. Okay? Could you please answer this question? Dominis Vobiscum. If you didn't know the answer to that question, you're in the younger part, I guess. If you think about this, we're talking about change, and change is a big issue for everyone. Some people love change. If there's a problem, the bigger the problem, the better, and let's tell everybody. And other people, if you see them on the street and Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, if you go back next week at Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, you'll see them walking down the street in the same place. But this process is going to require change. And I used a little bit of the Latin, but those of us that can remember when we transferred out of Latin, what a big change that was. And then, my God, there was Saturday night church. You could go to church on Saturday night for Sunday. And for some people, probably that still is not an acceptable piece of their religion. But I just want to remind you that we are here, and I just have been educated on the process. I'm here because I believe there's not a foregone conclusion to what is going to happen. I believe that they are genuinely interested in hearing everything that you have to say. I say they, which is the Catholic School Study Group, and I've been asked to mention who they are. Warren Tessier is the chairperson. You're going to hear from him in a little bit. Reverend Jerry Blow, Mr. John Fairchild, Mrs. Carrie Gadbois, Reverend Stephen Grotto, Sister Cordata, Mrs. Lorraine Laframboise, Dr. Ed Miller, Jean Mockery, Sister Kathleen Murphy, Reverend Kevin O'Brien. There, now we're getting somewhere. And then we go back to Reverend John Yankovic. Also represented here, and I don't know if Warren's going to say more about the people that are here from SUNY Technical Assistance Center, who are Wayne Glass and Marek Luzwinski, another good Irishman. I'm going to introduce, first of all, I want to go through the agenda with you, and then I'm going to introduce Warren, but I would ask everybody to remember one thing as we go through every step of this process is I believe the reason we're here is to discover appropriate futures for our children in Catholic education, and I hope that the focus will remain on children and education as we go throughout the evening. Tonight's agenda calls for something like this. Jean Mockery just finished. I'll manage the time, you manage the subject areas. We will go through the mission and overview process, and then we will have 3 presentations, which we'll get right to, and roughly 7:30, and I believe it will be later than that. Don't get nervous if we get behind tonight, because if you'll remember, the next session is 2 weeks from tonight, and there's less content, less presentations and those kind of things, and more opportunities for exchange and sharing of your ideas. So please keep that in mind if you go away thinking, gosh, I didn't get a chance to really say what I wanted to say. Formulate it, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to go on with that process. So then we'll have the roundtable discussions. We're going to have a quick stretch break, and then, God love us, 15 tables are going to report in a half an hour, and I'll lay the ground rules for that. And then we'll finish with question and answer here, but I think we're really committed to be gone at 9:30, so if we get behind, we will make it up next time. Okay, we really need to be out of here at 9:30, given the snow. Anything else I was supposed to do, Warren? Introduce you? Okay. Warren, you're at my mercy?
Okay. Thank you very much for coming this evening, especially with the weather as it is. We appreciate that you're taking time out of your personal lives to help this study group with their responsibilities and their challenges. This seems to be an appropriate year to study the topic of time of the year to study the topic of Catholic education. and perhaps recommit ourselves to sacrifice and renewal. For my part this evening, I want to review for you while you're here how we have structured this evening and also the one on the 25th of April. First off, the study group, with the encouragement and the blessing of the diocese, began to study the future of Catholic schools in Plattsburgh this past summer. And Ed, I think if you put the first one on, Kevin had alluded to change, and I think that probably says a lot. It's just one that I whipped up in a hurry just so we could get the message. We're all very sensitive to that. The second one, Ed, please. The committee is following a process that is outlined in an agreement that was signed by 4 pastors, the superintendent of schools of the diocese, and the bishop's representative. And that document, as well as a lot of other documents, will be available to you on the Seton homepage on the internet, which we are putting together and I think is available, and we'll get you that address either the course of the evening or back through the parishes if we have it. The agreement clearly states the need to seek input from all constituents and to work in an atmosphere of openness. To date, the committee, I think, has done that exceedingly well, and I'm very pleased to be working with them because all of the committee, with the exception of myself, are obviously very, very connected to this process. And I can say that their commitment and their work has actually been extraordinary under the circumstances. There are these. I think you can show them all because I'll try to do it a little quicker. These are some of the major topics that are being studied and evaluated. They're not all inclusive, but they cover an awful lot of ground, as you can see. There will be more information presented on each of these topics by the various chairpersons from the study group, and some of this information you've already received in the mail. I think we'll change the next one. The study group's responsibility is to develop recommendations to be presented to the 4 pastors of the schools involved. And again, these are some of the considerations that are being processed through the committee. What will happen with this information and as a result of all of this, the study group will make recommendations to the 4 pastors for their consideration. So the study group's responsibility is simply to come up with recommendations that tie into all of these bullets that are on the screen. After that has happened, and actually before that happens, the pastors and the councils from the parishes will have an opportunity again to review some of this information, and meeting with the pastors in their own parishes before a quote final vote of the committee to finalize the recommendations. So there is quite a process that's unfolding. Once the committee makes the recommendations to the pastors, essentially its work is done, the pastors then will have to approve those recommendations or modify them in some way. And then further, the bishop will have to approve them, and then at some point there would be an implementation of the process. And ultimately the goal is, as Wayne Gretzky will say on this last overhead, we're not interested in where the puck is, we're interested in where the puck is going. And that's ultimately the goal of the committee, to make those kinds of recommendations on behalf of the Catholic education process. Having said that, and by way of introduction, I'd like to get a little less formal and get into some of the housekeeping details, some of which I don't even know where they are. But, for example, I don't know, one of the housekeeping things that's important is where are the restrooms? And I don't know that. So you're on your own. But, Sister, would you want to do that?
Table a lot. The restrooms are down Central High School, chs.com. Seton, chs.com.
Thank you, Sister. There will be breaks and snacks downstairs. We should mention that Gordy Little and Calvin Castine are over here to my right from Hometown Cable, and they're going to air this for us and take all of your pictures throughout the course of the night for evidence, of course. You were all mailed a questionnaire, and we would like very much to have you return that. Probably the simplest way would be to leave it on the card table, or if you haven't done that already, on your way downstairs. No questionnaire? Well, for those of you who have, yes, and for those of you who don't, we'll find one so that we can have you fill it out. As far as the second half of the evening is concerned, and then we'll finish with some of the presenters, for the roundtable discussions that'll take place downstairs, we will have at each table a facilitator and a recorder. And they have received their instructions as to how the evening will go. There will be 2 specific questions to discuss, and those questions will be at the tables for you to talk about. Each of the tables will make a report to the larger group at the end of the time. Each facilitator will be required to at least point out 1 or 2 of the most pressing comments that came from that particular group. We will collect all of that information, your own written comments, those of the recorder and the facilitator, and the Technical Assistance Center will summarize the results and report that information to the study group. That will happen tonight, and it'll happen again on the 25th. After that piece of business has concluded, we will have time for questions and answers, time permitting at this point. One way or another, we'll adjust our schedule so that we give you the opportunity to ask those questions, and if we are not able to complete all of the answers, we'll pick it up. And it was a good decision we made to do this in 2 evenings because there is so much information, and we're quite a bit behind now. So in any event, those are some of the ground rules, and we'll be around to help you with this process as we go through it. And with that, I'm going to stop. And Kevin?
I've waited 44 years for this. Sister Cordata was incorrect. If you want to write down the web page number, actually, Warren's the one that set her up. This is the correct place to find things for you techies. Oh, I thought you'd left, sister. Sorry. The correct address is actually at the college. www.Plattsburgh, spelled all the way out, .edu/TAC/Seton. Did everybody get it? There'll be a test next week. www.Plattsburgh.edu/TAC/Seton. SETON. Not to be confused with MAI. First to talk about curriculum will be Jean Mockery.
Okay. Good evening. This probably isn't fair to Kevin, but as Kevin speaks, I'm drawn back to my days in Glens Falls, where I attended the Irish K-12 Catholic High School. And I had these memories of these boys in my class, and I had these memories of Sister getting all worked up. And boys saying things like, for the 100th time, I forgot my homework, sister, and I could never understand these kind of things. But Kevin, I feel like I went to school with you. I just wanted to share that with you. My job is to share with you the results of the curriculum committee. I have the job of chairing that committee. I've worked with wonderful people this year, and we've met many, many times. The people on this committee are the principals of our schools. Lorraine Laframbois from OLV, John Fairchild, St. John's, Carrie Gadbois, St. Alexander's, Sister Brian Marie, Vice Principal at St. John's, and Trish Dosick, who is a teacher and very involved in St. Peter's Parish and on our Ed Council. The 6 of us started meeting in the early fall, and we were given the task at that time, we were a subcommittee of the steering committee, to examine curriculum. And in this examination of curriculum, our goal was to look ahead to the first decade of the new millennium, to look ahead to where our schools were going. We all see ourselves as colleagues. We see ourselves in the same business, working together to provide an education that meets New York State standards, but with a value system as Jesus Christ has taught us. And that is, we feel, a wonderful, wonderful mission that we have. So we do not see ourselves in conflict with each other. I'd like to show the first overhead here. This overhead struck us. In meeting New York State standards, cooperative learning is an integral part of learning. Our goal is to help children work with each other, to look at situations, to work with people maybe they don't feel like working with, keeping the goal in mind that we together can use our minds and come up with a wonderful end product. We in the committee saw that as where we were at when we began this study last fall. And actually, even now, this is very applicable to where we're going in the next phase. Everyone here represents leadership in our 5 schools. So all of us are in this cooperative learning phase with each other in order to try and provide the very best education we can for our children in the with the Catholic model. So anyway, that's where that came from. Roger Johnson's words came in handy. Trying to provide a visual here, we have 2 orbits. We see our 4 pre-K-8 schools in 1 orbit, working very hard, again, to provide a very solid academic program for our children. We see Seton, our Catholic high school, on another orbit. And as orbits circulate, our paths periodically cross with Seton, but not nearly enough. Hence the concerns at the bottom of this sheet here. Probably the biggest shared issue for all of us is our personnel and keeping qualified, competent teachers in our schools. With New York State, we have certification pre-K to 6, elementary education, and then the next state certification is 7-12. And having people work with our junior high, very often we will take pre-K 6 teachers who are New York State certified and say, well, how good is your math? How good is your second language, your science? And we move people into those positions. Or if we have people that are qualified, most of us find a very high turnover with that. Now, this is not to say we don't have very good people, very dedicated people in these positions right now. But in particular, in our junior high, there is a very high turnover. We are also very aware of the openings and retirements that are happening in our government schools. Money-wise, we are not in a place to be able to entice as our government systems are. This is probably one of our hugest concerns, is having very good people. And we have had good people, but to keep those good people. Also, in terms of meeting the New York State learning standards, which we are all, I think, doing very noble jobs and doing a very nice doing very nice work. But we need resources. This involves cost. Language labs we would love to have. We'd like to keep our science labs, keeping those science labs equipped. Also, keeping up with technology, which is ever changing. It seems like there's this commercial where this man is feeling very, very happy that he has the latest upgraded computer, and as he's going down the street in his car feeling pretty cocky with himself, he looks up and the billboard is changing it, and he finds that before he even gets home with it, it's outdated. That's extreme, but it's our reality to keep up with this. Given what our government schools are able to provide, this is a tricky business for us. Also in our 4 schools, our focus and curriculum may not be exactly the same. We're not using the same textbooks. We do not always have the same. We have certain latitude in teaching our children, and they may not all feed into the high school with the same background and experiences. And we find this feedback comes back to us from our high school colleagues. We also see a huge need for our arts to be more, a larger, more solid part of our curriculum. If we have a teacher one year that will do drama, if we have a teacher one year, and this is above and beyond classroom work, we have these things going on periodically in our schools. We would like to see this much more engraved in the curriculum. The arts are a marvelous way for children to gain self-confidence. It's a marvelous way for children to see success, and with that success to feel better and working in school. So the arts we see very, very critical for the future. So that is something we'd like to see upgraded. Some of our schools have classes that are very small, and that is not always ideal for good learning, particularly with your cooperative format, needing exchanges of ideas, kids working in groups. We would like to see a stabilization of class size. Small is not always the best. We're looking at mid-teens to low 20s for ideal learning scenarios in our schools. And we also agree with a lot of experts. 6th grade, the 6th graders are kind of a twilight zone between your elementary mode and your junior high mode of responsibility, moving from grade to grade. We have concluded among ourselves that we lean toward the model of 6th grade being self-contained with a wonderful teacher in there helping them transition from elementary into the adolescent mindset. And that is a tricky mindset. As all of us that have teens know, that is a very painful time for our children, and we need to have adults working with those children that are inclined to be with them. So those are our concerns. And with that, we have come to these conclusions. As our schools continue to align themselves with the new New York State learning standards at each grade level, the curriculum committee envisions one united system, pooling resources and personnel. Our task is to give a recommendation as to what would be best for our children in learning. And we believe that having a system where we share with each other, where we know somebody has a lab, let's use that lab, where we're all working together is the very best. But if you'll notice in this model, 7th and 8th grade are separated. Now that does not necessarily mean they're in a different building. This does not even take in the building configurations because I don't know where we're going with that. That's another group. You can have this all in one building and have 7th and 8th grade in a wing. You could have a 7-12 configuration just to make sure that the 7th and 8th graders are working with people inclined and sensitive to the needs of 7th and 8th graders, whatever that configuration. This does not necessarily mean one pre-K to 6. I don't know what it would all play out in terms of buildings. Our consensus is we need to be working together as we run into this new century. Thank you.
It's hard for me not to say something smart, but I wouldn't want to take away any of the sincerity or passion with which Jean presented that with. Now to deal with buildings, Father Grotto.
You're right in order, Tom. Good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here with you. My task is to introduce you to questions about our Catholic school facilities. As been indicated, there are different work groups, and the Facilities Committee as such has not yet begun to meet. The information gathering stage has taken, frankly, longer than I anticipated. We've relied on the Diocesan Insurance Office, the Diocesan Chancery, the local schools themselves, their own self-report, and also evaluation by the North Country Center for Independent Living. So a lot of data, just hard data describing our schools, has come together. As you know, we have 4 elementary schools and 1 central high school. If we could look at our first slide, it'll give you a sense of the values of these facilities based on 1999 assessment for insurance purposes. Elementary schools worth $10 million. So this is a significant investment by our Catholic community over many years. Our elementary schools are all products of the 1950s, with the exception of the old wing at St. John's. The high school, Seton Catholic High School here, is valued at $6,760,000. A substantial portion of that value is this section, the gymnasium and cafeteria that we're in tonight. And so all our facilities are $17 million worth of facilities, valued, as we'll see later, at about 85 to 90% for insurance purposes of their replacement value. Now, if we look at our facilities from the standpoint of square feet, and this all becomes useful data, maybe not immediate to some of what you'll discuss tonight, but as you think about Jean Mockery's presentation and how we adapt to new standards of education, new expectations for our classrooms, and meet things that have been unmet, we have to think about what we have. We have the 4 elementary schools that total at about 115,000 square feet. 2 of those schools, Our Lady of Victory and St. Alexander's, are more or less the same size. What makes Our Lady of Victory different is it has a full regulation gym. And then St. Peter's is larger than St. Alexander's or Our Lady of Victory in terms of classroom space, but does not have a full regulation gym. And then you go to St. John's, which is the biggest of the elementary facilities, with a full regulation gym and 2 stories. Our high school is 81,000 square feet, not all of which, if you are familiar with Seton, is really usable space as you go down into some of the transitional areas from the old school to the wing built, I think, in the 50s or into this area. So total square feet, 196,000. Now, what does this come out per square foot? And that's the next slide. And that will help you begin to think in terms of a question that we will have to face. We have to face the question later in this process of renovation or replacement. The value per square foot of our elementary system, then, when you take the assessed value in 1999, and the square footage is $89 a square foot. So you can see, if you're familiar at all with current building costs, how this insured value is obviously below replacement costs. The high school comes out to $86 a square foot. As we look then at the value and the size, we recognize that currently these are scattered, 3 in the city and 1 in what I like to call the country, the bucolic setting of eastern Morrisonville. We have to now ask ourselves a question from size to space actually devoted to classrooms. We could have that next slide. Got it? Oh, how'd you do that? You just were quick, read my mind. Right now in 1998, 1999, we enrolled 863 students in space for 1,100 students. So you see a noticeable gap between what we could hold and what we hold. And I'm using here the figure of 18 students per classroom. So that's kind of a middle level between the low end of the teens that Jean referred to and the high end of the teens and the low end of the 20s. 18 students per classroom. We have space for 1,100 students. So certainly one of the things before us is simply the demographics, which I believe, Ed, you're going to speak a bit more directly to, because the availability of a student population is significant to our future. The high school holds approximately 468 students in 26 classrooms, 335 students in actuality last year. Now where this begins to turn into the expense of overhead, the cost of maintaining a facility, the question of how you renovate and reuse what you have, or the decision to replace it comes down on the next line. There are 75 classrooms. We use 61 classrooms. We only currently need 48 classrooms. So this question of where the space is located, how the space is used, and how can you change that space to be better used. And there's another question, which is enrollment itself. We could go to the next slide. When we surveyed the administration of the schools, we asked the question about needs, and also through the kinds of interactions we have as pastors and principals, certainly many things are raised. And the next one is, what do we need? This was brought home to me today when we were trying to hear confessions at St. Alexander's School in the gymnasium while they were getting the cafeteria section ready. And in the afternoon, we're trying to hear confessions while they're getting ready to set up for bingo. And I thought to myself, there seems to be a mixed message to the children here during this sacramental experience. Here we are having this kind of presentation in a gymnasium. It's a facility need that it illustrates. We need athletic facilities. We have the 3 gyms that are regulation size, but we have very little by way of playing fields for the sports that we try to engage in, practice fields, and I would put under athletic facilities adequate and safe and enjoyable play areas for the lower grades. As Jean mentioned, the arts and the humanities. We have no dedicated integral space in our schools. Seton has some converted space. At best, that's what's happened. But to really have space which was built and designed for the arts and humanities, for music, for playlets, for small dramatic performances, for those kinds of activities which, as she said, enrich our students' lives and introduce them to a hands-on learning. We lack that. We have very poor space for assemblies and meetings. And there's 2 issues there. The assembly for the learning purposes of the students and the orientation of value to your general public. We have little space on any campus for expansion and development. And that's something just as you drive around to take a look at. And so that raises a question about how you replace or how you expand. And finally, our schools are not at standard for the norms of accessibility today that is expected in the American Disabilities Act. And really, if you think about our aging cohort of support, which is in the older Catholic population, many of our schools are becoming inaccessible to them. And certainly they are not easily accessible in most cases, for children who would have conditions that need special access. I would end with 3 others for you to think of as the long-range facility needs of our school. These are in addition to what's here. Renovating our schools so that they are adequate to the technological needs of today and the future. Second, renovating or replacing, and those 2 verbs have to keep fitting in back and forth, for curriculum enrichment, for the small group experience, for the reading area in a library, those kinds of things which sometimes we're very hard-pressed to use. And last of all, science, that we really all operate with less than adequate laboratory facilities and opportunities for hands-on science learning. So that's our facility needs that we've identified at this point. And it'll be the task of our facilities committee now that there is a kind of a clear picture and pieces beginning to form to explore how we will address this in the future. Thank you.
Father, you really have to learn how to project a little more. I'm still thinking about how they do confession in the gymnasium.
You have to be very open and honest.
I'm not mature enough for that. Dr. Ed, you get to talk about finances and demographics. And I think you can see how hard these presenters have worked on their presentations.
So, where's Sister Cordata? Oh, mea culpa. I left Sister out of the list for the curriculum group, and probably that was God getting me back for trying to get Kevin. Sister, I'm very sorry. Sister was also an integral part of our curriculum study.
They're kind of in order, sort of. I have a few minutes. I'm going to say something, and they can fire me if they don't like it. But usually you don't get fired in the Catholic Church very often. I've had a unique perspective working with the group of 10 people that constitute the Catholic school group over the last 9 months. And I'm neither a principal nor a pastor nor the chair. Basically, I'm one of you folks in that I serve on the Seton Education Council. Now, for a number of years, I've been very excited about Catholic education, and it's been something very important to me, as it has been to you. Growing up with the Sisters of Immaculate Heart in elementary school, the Brothers of Mary in high school, and then the Jesuits in college, I really got a good education and never really understood the value of that to, of course, much later in life. You know, the old adage about your father got so smart, you know, between the time you were 18 and 25 or something like that, you never realized all the stuff they were telling you, how important the things you were getting were. But I just want to say a couple things about the group. The group is made up of a chair, who's Warren. He's had a very quiet, patient leadership and has brought the people to the table to really become a team, become a family. We've laid things on the table. Sometimes we didn't always agree, but the study group worked through these things. And then there's the group of principals, the 5 principals from our 4 elementary and high school. And I know personally I've given them and their faculty and staff the most precious thing in my life, being my daughters. And I'm sure most of you have given your kids, grandkids, to them to educate as well. They're working very hard on this group, and if you've ever tried to do 2 jobs, you know how hard that is, because they are full-time principals, and this is an additional piece of work for them. And then finally the pastors, and I got to salute them because this is a courageous thing that they're doing. They deal in the course of a week, as you know, with baptisms, births, marriages, deaths, and go through life faster in a week than we do in a number of years. They're struggling with this and trying to figure out how to basically continue the faith for the children that will come after this. So I think this is an extraordinary opportunity, both tonight and in the coming months, for us to give input, for us to help them, namely the pastors and the principals, lead us into the future. And I think it's something we need to keep in mind, that they're struggling with this as well, and they need our support and our help. So I just thought I'd say that because I have a different sort of angle than these folks do, because I'm one of you, and I'm urging you to help them come to good conclusions. My job was to do the finance. This is not going to be as interesting maybe as the other ones, because it tends to just be numbers. Our committee was made up of several people. Father Jerry from OLVA, I always say OLVA, from OLV was our host, and his cook makes fantastic lunches and subs if you ever have a committee meeting over there. He's been a gracious host. Father Yankovic from St. Peter's, John Fairchild, principal at St. John's, and Sheila Murnane, who was, until just recently, the business manager at Seton Catholic, and myself. Most of the numbers that you will see are based on the 1998 budget year. Just to let you know, most of the numbers excuse me, have been reviewed by the diocese accounting office. So we've made some corrections and make sure, one of our key things is to make sure that excuse me, that all the information you're getting is correct. Can you put the first slide up? I'm basically going to go through a few things, talk about where the money comes from, what it's spent on, changes, and then demographics. Okay? So it's a pretty straightforward presentation if you can remember those things. Where the money comes from is the first slide, basically revenue. It's a staggering number. You probably can't see the little print on your slide that you got in your package, but we as Catholics support Catholic schools to the tune of about $4.3 million. That's the 4 elementaries and the high school. Now, the main sources of that income, as you can see on this slide, are shown. The large blue slice down on the bottom of the picture is tuition. About 33% of the income to the schools comes from tuition. Now, I'm sure you can all guess, especially you folks on the Finance Council, what the next biggest source of income is, and that's subsidy. Subsidy is the money that comes from the parish, is given to the school to help support the school. That's shown in sort of the purple-colored slice to the left on the bottom, and that amounts to about 16% of the income to the schools. So with those two pieces, you have basically half the income to the schools. Now there's some other slices there which we're all familiar with, bingo being one of them. Many of you work bingo, you know how important it is to the income in your schools. Unfortunately, the revenue for bingo over the last 5 years has been down about 3%. Now, so I just point that out. These are just facts. The Finance Committee is not making any interpretation of these things at this point, but we're putting everything on the table so you understand the full financial picture. One area that the Finance Committee looked at that is woefully underdeveloped at this point is development. Okay, most of the schools have not done any kind of significant development program, except for St. John's, of course, which had many years ago set up an endowment for the school. So we recognize development as an area in the future that needs to be looked at, and its relationship to fundraising be clarified. Can I have the next slide, Gene? So that's where the money comes from. Now, where does it go? Now, teaching schools are labor-intensive operations. Okay, they don't have a lot of fancy machinery, except for maybe photocopiers and things like that. What they have all their money invested in is the people, the teachers. So the main bar that you see there, the real tall one, which is where most of the money is spent that comes in the door, is in the teaching and supporting of teaching activities. The next highest amount of expenditure is in the administration area. Now, administration includes a lot of things. It includes obviously the principal, but at the high school level it also includes vice principals, athletic directors, guidance counselors, secretaries, business agents, and etc. So administration is a significant expenditure, but not nearly as much as the money that we actually spend on educating the students. That's where most of the money goes. Okay, can you switch? Now, what about changes? That's the money where it comes in, the money where it goes out. What are we looking at in terms of changes in these streams? Okay, first of all, this particular slide shows changes in tuition. Now, what we did was we did a study of the past 5 years for each of the parishes in terms of their tuition trends. And we projected from that study what the tuition might be 10 years from now. What you can't see, the large purple bar on each one is Seton, and then the 4 other colored bars are the other elementary schools. Basically, projecting out 10 years, tuition at Seton would be, if it continues in the same trend with about 3% inflation, would be in the realm of about $3,000 per student per year. In terms of the elementary schools, it would average in terms of collected tuition about $1.5 thousand, so about $1,500 for the elementary schools. I already told you about bingo changing, so that's another revenue stream that is going down, but actions are being taken perhaps to try and keep that, increase it. Inflation overall for the schools runs in the range of 2 to 5%. The county range for the same time period is about 2.5%. So only one of the schools is below the county rate of inflation. Most of the other schools are running at about 5% inflation costs. Okay, can I have the next slide? Continuing with changes in revenue stream, this particular slide shows changes in the Seton subsidy. Now, as you may know, Seton is a joint venture of the 4 parishes. The subsidy for Seton as a joint venture is basically funded at 60% of the subsidy comes from the 4 parishes that have prime responsibility for that venture. And the blue color that you see on the bottom is the subsidy that comes from those 4 core parishes. The kind of pink or red color is subsidy that comes from what we call the regional parishes. Regional parishes also support Seton roughly around in the 40% range. Okay, a smaller percentage comes from what we call outlying parishes. So we have 3 different levels of parish support coming into Seton. If we do the same projection that we did for tuition, in other words, we look out about 10 years, subsidy for Seton will be in the range of about $300,000, and that comes from the various parishes. Can you put the next slide on? Now, to really hit you in the head with this, what we did was we looked at the subsidy that each of your parishes pays to its elementary school, and we added to that number the amount that it pays in subsidy to Seton Catholic. We took that number and then divided it by 52. So the numbers you see on the right side of this slide are the amounts that would have to appear in a Sunday basket every Sunday in 10 years to support the subsidies. Okay, now, this is a projection. This is a projection with the status quo. In other words, with the way we look right now, with 5 schools, with exactly the administration type we have and business setup. Now, if you add to this the idea, and actually it's the last slide in your package, the fact that the total income for the parishes, the 4 core parishes that is, has basically been flat for the last 3 years. This could raise some concern and be a flag that it needs to be looked at and addressed. Okay, can you put the next slide up? This was a slide that I added. It may be a little bit out of order, but to give you an idea about how much of your parish income is going towards subsidy for the various Catholic schools. And it basically is self-explanatory. It ranges from about 13 to 14% up to about 25% in terms of how much is going into the schools. Okay, can you put the next one up? Now, I told you where the money comes from, where it goes, and some of the changes in the revenue streams that we've seen. This particular slide now gives you basically some facts. So before you go off thinking that the teachers, that big bar with the instructional salary was because of all these thousands of dollars high salaries we're paying the teachers, this particular slide brings you back to earth, and it shows you that the average salary for all of our teachers in the elementary schools is basically about $20,000. Okay. Now, if you just quickly contrast that with the starting salary on the bottom in the public sector, which is in the realm of about $30,000. Depends on what school you go to. It varies, high 20s to low 30s. That $20,000 average salary goes along with teachers who have on average about 8 years of teaching experience. So the concept that sometimes you get this image that there's quite a bit of teacher turnover in our Catholic schools. That's not completely true. There's turnover in certain grades perhaps, but we have many long-term teachers in the various schools. The average starting salary for the 4 elementary schools, and actually also Seton is in this range as well, is about $15,000. So again, there's a tremendous contrast between our starting salary and the public sector. Total number of teachers in the 4 elementaries is 56. So that's the number of teachers that are out there. If you take those 56 teachers and split them up into their various schools, you see on the graph what is called the student-faculty ratios. So on average, for example, at Our Lady of Victory, the student-faculty ratio is about 14-1. And I think the lowest one is in the range of about 11.4 to 1. So that would be the number of students on average with every teacher in a sense. It's not exactly class size because we have extra teachers that do specialty things, and so the actual student-faculty ratio is a little bit lower. Okay, can you change it? Now the final slide that I have for you is a slide on demographics. And this particular slide was very mind-boggling, I guess you could say, when I first saw it. It's a little bit different than the one you have in your package. Basically, it's a combination of the two, hopefully a little bit clearer. We got the birth statistics, actually from TAC, helped us get this information, to 1997. Now, as you can see, births in 1993, which is the bar all the way to the far left, we're somewhere around 1,200, say. Okay, that's not the exact number, but it's close enough. If you look to the far right, you see the bar on the right? They were the number of live births in Clinton County in 1997. If you look at that, you see a significant decrease in the number of births, and we basically, rough estimate is about 30% in 5 years. Now, the numbers underneath the years, you see on the far left, I have 93, 94, 95, blah, blah, blah. Underneath that, it says K with a number. On the far left, it starts out K98, and on the far right, it ends with K02. What that means is those children will be entering kindergarten in those years. And probably many of you have seen the articles in the paper about all the school districts now wondering about lower enrollments. They're also looking at these statistics and seeing the decrease in births in Clinton County. Now, we don't have the 98 numbers yet or the 99 numbers. Anecdotally, I do understand that 98 has leveled off in terms of dropping in the birth rate. So demographically, if we want to project out there 10 years, the question is, how many students will we have in our classes? Now, that's always a risky business because you don't know what developments will occur in the county. But these are things that the people in the study group have to keep in mind as we struggle with all this information to hammer it into something intelligible and to give us direction. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and that's all I have.
Well, I think you can see that all 4 presenters put a lot of work into that. And their challenge involving me was to make it understandable so even I could understand it. So they kept changing it until it was where I could get it, so they figured all of you could get it. I hypothesized that the birth rates have gone like that because the Murnanes stopped having children about that time, wasn't it? That's what I thought. We're going to go downstairs, and I would ask you to do it quickly. We're a little bit behind, but you can see from those presentations we didn't want to slight any of that information, all heady, good stuff. If you don't have a name tag, Mr. Fairchild will be outside to make sure that you get one. If you do have one, if you can go right down to the cafeteria, we want to get started right away.
Well, it made me want to get my checkbook out, Father. How are you?
That's good. Good to see you tonight, Gordon.
We had to kid him a little bit about projecting.
Oh, yeah, well, I learned years ago, speak up.
Speak up without the microphone, it'll work with one.
That's right, that's right.
When you called and asked if we could do a television program about your program tonight, I immediately said yes, because it's such an important cause.
Well, this is really a big moment to look at our Catholic schools and decide how we're going to handle it for the next 10 years, because you have over 100 years of Catholic education behind us here in Plattsburgh, so it's a heritage worth keeping.
I noticed when we were talking with Lefty Tessier earlier in the evening, I mentioned that in a recent North Country Catholic, they're doing the same thing in Watertown, almost as we speak, aren't
Yes, they are. They started a little later, more focused on the junior high. They have 3 schools, I think 4, and but with the high school is much newer, and so they could accommodate their junior high there, and that's, I think, the direction they're going.
This is actually a 2-part series of get-togethers. Another one is planned for later in the month. We're recording this on the 11th day of April. Another program will be on the 25th, you said?
25th, yes, 25th. Yeah. And so tonight, this first part gives these representatives from all these parishes basic information, as people have seen. And then second, they're going to discuss tonight what their own vision of Catholic education is. What do they really believe we have to keep available in Catholic education? And that should help us begin to understand, well, really the level of commitment, the level of interest, the qualities of Catholic schools that parents would be invested in supporting. Then the next session moves even a little farther down into more brass tacks about the kind of schools, the grade arrangements, those kinds of things that then give us, another level of feel for how the parish leadership would support change.
And this brainstorming really works.
I think it really does. Yes, I do. And I might mention here, as may have been mentioned, we will be doing 2 more things. We're going to have parishioners invited to focus groups so that they can talk about this. These are not big wide-scale meetings, but focus groups, meaning 10 or 15 people in a group working one evening, and then another group, and so forth and so on. And then a survey. And the survey will be to the larger Catholic population and probably some of the general population about what do they support about Catholic education, what are they interested in, and by then we should have some ideas of where we want to go. And so what's your reaction to the plan, folks?
So you're connected with the whole picture now. You're working with the facilities, right?
Yes. I have to laugh. I don't know if I put my hand up for the right committee when we were organizing, because facilities is a challenge. It's we need an environment within which to put our students, and as the report tonight indicated, we're looking at a declining birth rate, at least for a while. Even if we keep the same percentage of children, which is about 33%, we're still going to have fewer children. So sometimes people don't quite understand. We're not talking about running scared because Catholics aren't putting their children in Catholic schools. We're talking about there are fewer children to put in schools. And that question affects, as Ed said, everybody. So we have to be aware of that. And then that leads to questions about how you keep up your buildings, and is it better to build or to renovate? There's a lot of tough ones coming down the pike in the facility area.
You've had a chance to do some real serious thinking yourself. What are some of the things you'd like to see come out of the end of this discussion personally? I mean, you're very closely aligned with our St. Alexander School, where I'm going to read some stories for the kids tomorrow morning.
Oh, good. Yes, that's a great little school. I'll put a plug in for it, because sometimes people forget about St. A's just far enough outside of town.
In the country, as you said.
In the country, that's right. I come in from the country to the city to help them out. I think myself, I have to say, I was saying to people in the fall, what I found wonderful about this experience from August on was I'd never worked with a group that was so open-minded and had no agendas. There's nobody who came there saying, my school has to be the one that stays open or becomes this or becomes that. A lot of objective thinking. And so That really still is my biggest hope, that the whole process is as objective and fair as possible, and that we have good pre-K to 6 schools. I mean, I think that decision, as it's shaping up, is the right one for us. But the tough part of that is we got more space than we need for that age group, and that's going to cause people concern. Now, there's some other things we're just talking about. Early childhood education, expanded nursery care, bigger pre-K. In some parts of the country now there's actually K1 and K2, so that if children need a little more work at one side or the other level of maturity, well, that would be a different way to use some of our space. So I think the next thing that's bubbling up there is the alternative uses for the space we got. Now, there's another group, I'm sure that they'll speak tonight, some of them, who would just like us to build a really brand spanking new place. I'm going to ask them to run the drive.
Yeah, it does cost money.
Well, if you look at what we have is worth $17 million, and that's only at about insured at about $89 a square foot, and new construction would be about $120 to $135. That's a big expenditure to develop a whole new facility where everybody's on one campus. And when that idea is raised, the concern I hear back from people out our way, out in St. A's, in Katyville, now it becomes too far, if you live in Saranac or farther out, to get into a Catholic school. So there's these pluses and minuses of every good idea that have to be kicked around.
Well, let's hope it has a happy ending. It certainly is worthwhile. You have some great minds gathered here, some good community leaders, a lot of people who really care, and I could see people buzzing as they looked at the slides tonight and talking back and forth. There might have been a few surprises, but that's all right.
I think so.
It was nice to see this big a turnout. We had hoped for 100. It was very stormy when we got here tonight, and actually we ended up with very close to 100 people here, and that's good.
That's a good tribute to the parish, these lay parish leadership, and I think that's another great plus of the age we're in, because as pastors, when you invite people in, you got more help making the tough decisions.
I know there are so many tough decisions because I hear you from the pulpit every Sunday morning, and it's very, very tough. I don't know what's going to happen outside the Catholic education. What's going to happen with the clergy? How are we going to reinforce the people who decide to dedicate their lives to what you do every day? It's very, very difficult.
It is.
And our parishes really suffer between your joint parishes, so many hard decisions to make. I grieve for you, and I pray for you.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think our Catholic people have to keep thinking about vocations to the priesthood and religious life. There's a lot of things, say these folks right here, valued from their experience in Catholic schools or in their parish life, and that the rest of that heritage relies in great part on priests and religious, as well as lay people who are willing to devote themselves to the church. You see a few of those here at St. Alexander's, for instance, but that's a vocation too. I mean, that's giving up lucrative public income in the other or private sector income to work at a much lower rate to serve the church. So we need that. We need people to speak well and highly of the value of religious work in our communities.
Well, as we're up here, still in the gym, you can see it's relatively empty, and I fully expect sparks and smoke to be coming up the stairway.
Well, I think so.
Some lively discussion going on, and we'll hear the product of that later on.
That's right. Looking forward to that part.
Father, thanks for inviting us here
Thank
tonight.
you for coming. Good.
All right, we're closer to the snacks, so my spirits are picked up. I got a cup of hot coffee and Father Jerry Blow next to me. How are you?
I'm very good.
I'm great, too. Well, there had been a slight change of plans tonight. Things got a little bit behind schedule. We weren't quite sure how the timing was going to work out upstairs. So these study groups, if you will, are getting very interesting and animated down here. And ultimately, when this is over later this evening at about 10 after 9, there's going to be a question and answer period, and then reports during the next session which will be on April 25th, I think, right, Father?
That's correct, right.
All right. How did you get involved with this?
Well, this has been 2 or 3 years in the making. Several false starts talking about whether or not we should be talking to each other or not, trying to work this out. Last August, finally, Ed Miller pulled us together and said, look, fellas, we need to talk. And from that point on, it began to build and build and build. By September, we had a working committee, and Warren Tessier on board as our chairman, and we've been moving forward ever since with the chairs and the presentations you saw earlier tonight.
He's a good guy to have on your side, isn't he?
Oh, yes. He's very good, very patient. Keeps the priests in line. That's important.
I won't say that's no small task.
That's a very large task.
Listen, if all the Catholic schools in America had promoters like Father Jerry, things would be okay. You work very hard for your kids up there and for your whole parish, and it shows. It's a fun group of folks up on your end of town. Not that they aren't fun everywhere else, but I love to go up there because there's a great spirit of community up there.
Oh, yeah, they're good folk, and they've been around a long time, some of them. They're real professionals. They've been in Catholic education 8 to 10 to 20 years in some cases. Our principal, 35 years. It's a good thing to have, people like that. They like the longevity.
How much hands-on do you do with the school operation?
I do all the budgeting. I do all the finances. We're kind of a low-budget operation. We try to put our money into our technology, into our teachers' salaries, and I do a lot of the budget work and take care of some of the financial planning and the financial stuff, and basically meet with Lorraine once a week, our principal, Lorraine Leframbois, once a week with regard to what's going on, and she either tells me what I'm going to do or I tell her what I'm not going to do, however it's going to happen.
What to do and where to go with it,
That's
right? I hope a lot of non-Catholics are watching this program on hometown cable, whatever cable system it might be broadcast on, because there are a lot of lessons to be learned here tonight. When you say low budget, you aren't kidding. We compare some of the teacher salaries in the public sector, if you will, with the starting salaries. And I know a young man who graduated from Peru, the Peru school system, and is teaching in a Catholic school down in I'm not sure if he went to school in Ohio, and I think he's teaching in New Jersey. But his starting salary, you talk about making a sacrifice, where he could have made twice that or 2.5 times that in a public school system, but he made that choice. And it was because of his Catholic education, and he wanted to impart that. And I constantly tell him in the email that flies back and forth between us that I appreciate him for making that decision. And that's what it takes, a lot of dedication and a lot of people deciding that this system is going to work.
Right. I know in our case, what we've decided is, I don't know about the other 3 schools that we work with right here on this committee, but we basically decided our premise is keep within 70% of the public school salaries, and we'll keep our teachers a little bit longer. But eventually they're going to have to feed families. They've got to have proper medical care. We give them pretty good medical care, but they need to have full care. They need a good benefit, retirement benefit. These are things that are difficult for us to provide. But if we can keep them a little bit longer, but I think one of the things about this Catholic School Study Groups is to provide a good chance at a better salary, better benefits, better medical benefits, better retirement, all those things that alone we have a difficult time providing. And together we can do a better job with our teachers on. That's a very important part of the considerations here tonight.
A lot of teamwork going on here, and a lot of bright people that are stirring up the air back and forth with their conversations. We asked Father Grotto what he'd like to see come out the other end of this little horn.
Oh my!
How about some of your dreams, if you were to make your wish list and send it to Santa Claus?
Well, emphasize now it's my idea what we'd like to do. I think we need one system, one centralized system from pre-K right up through. We need to work together as 4 parishes at least, eventually become a regionalized school, and at least have 1 to 2 good pre-K to 6s with a child care facility somewhere, providing some income to that whole thing, a nice middle school, 7th and 8th grade middle school, and then a really strong high school that's fed in by those 1 or 2, that one middle school at 7 8 that'll be somewhere, whether it's here in this building at Seton or somewhere else, we don't know at this point. That's my dream.
We're going to be sending some surveys out fairly soon.
Right.
And we'll get an idea what the general population thinks.
Right. That's going to be interesting. We know what we think, And we're trying to keep ourselves as, I call it tabula rasa, an erased blackboard for the time being. But now it's beginning to fill in. We start hearing what these people think, what our teachers thought, and then eventually what the general public thinks. We're going to have to make a decision somewhere along the way. And that's going to be difficult for us because, somewhere along the way we have to take all this material and say, well, this is the best way to go at this point in time. And hopefully to move forward 10 years.
Well, there's no way to sit back and let nature take its course, because if we didn't have things like this, we'd be very sorry with the outcome.
That's right. This is important because you need to have the ownership of these folks out here and then the general public. That's a very important thing that TAC has been saying from SUNY, and certainly other experts have told us. Make sure you have the input of the people. And even if it comes out they don't like what you're about to do or relatively dislike it, at least they say, well, at least I had a point, at least I made a point, at least I had a chance to say what needed to be said about the whole thing. I had my chance to make some input.
It's nice to have a technical assistance center and those resources available, isn't it?
That's right, it is. These things don't come cheaply, and I think we've got some pretty good high-quality people for a relatively, efficient price. I won't say cheap because that doesn't sound very nice, but, some of these other consulting firms are extremely expensive. That was a big issue for us, what to do, because in the North Country, people say, oh, you're going to spend that kind of money to do this, And we had to say, well, what are the people going to think? But we still have to have somebody help us with the survey, help us with the instruments, and draw the people out and tell us what we need in this whole thing, So
well, let's hope we have a positive outcome.
Yeah.
Father Jerry, thanks for being with us. Thanks for your amazing contribution to our community.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't know how amazing it is, but it's contribution anyway.
That's pretty good.
Okay.
Dr. Ed Miller, how are you?
Very well.
Well, you dazzled everybody with your financial footwork earlier this evening.
Thank you.
Where are we at this point in time? I know you've done a lot of work up until now. I know you just didn't pull those charts and pies out of the sky. There's a lot of work to be done, but you guys have already worked quite hard.
Yeah, we actually have about a 30-page report on the finances, and what we tried to do was take the important information out of that everyone could use and understand, and that's what we based our presentation on.
And I think some people were surprised with some of your figures.
About the numbers, yeah, they are very surprising. And I think that's why the group thinks it's important to start looking ahead. Now, the numbers, people can look at the numbers and say, oh, they're terrible, and panic. But that's not what we're trying to do. The numbers are indicating that we need to look ahead and start planning what we want our schools to look like and how we want to support them. So that's what we were trying to do, is show people that there are things that we need to be thinking about now so that the schools can be strong 10 years from now.
Every business has a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and it's not too soon to be talking about 10 years down the road, especially for Catholic education. Yeah,
we're in a very strong position now. The last time we went through the merger process, St. John's merged with MAI.
How well I remember that time period.
Yeah, I was on the board at St. John's at that time, and we were really financially pinched, and we discovered when we met with the brothers that they also were really financially pinched, and we probably we were 1 year probably away from closing the high school at St. John's if the merger had not happened anyway. And we're definitely not in that position right now. The schools are pretty strong. We know what the numbers look like. And we're starting to identify things that we need to work on. Development, for instance. Stewardship in the parishes. Different things are starting to pop out of these numbers that people are recognizing now and decide they want to work on.
So, have you watched some of these discussions here tonight? Have you put your ears close to any of these tables?
No. We decided we wanted, this is for the councils to talk over and come to some conclusions. We were consciously staying out of it at this point. The pastors, as you notice, are all off to the side here talking among themselves. And what we're interested in hearing is what they have to say. We want to go into this in a mode where we build community. That's a key piece to this. A lot of times you'll hear some committee will be doing some study, and then all of a sudden some recommendation will pop out, and that's what the board's going to do. What we're trying to do is approach it that the community is a partner in this development of whatever we're going to be in 10 years. So it's important for them not to feel that, they want us to give them answers. We want to hear what they have to say and what their vision is of the future.
There'll be some more input from that community too, and we've been talking about a survey that's going out.
Yes. There's a whole range of things that are going to happen between probably about now and August, I suppose. We're going to, of course, have another meeting of this group on the 25th where we'll get more into the finances, into the spirituality, and also into the pedagogy. Following that meeting, the TAC group is going to take all the information and try to produce something intelligent out of it for us to digest as a Catholic school group. Then we'll begin to craft recommendations. Those will be shared with these groups again, and as I understand, we'll also be sharing it with the faculty again. Then there'll be a final sharing, probably in August, once recommendations are probably near the final version that the committee is going to vote on to move on to the pastors. Now there'll be in addition to the council members, we have discussed bringing in focus groups, other people, other parishioners, and then also doing a more general parish-wide survey. So we hope the input that these people generate in the next 2 meetings will help us craft the questions we want to ask in the more general population survey.
We listened to you talk earlier as you made that sterling presentation upstairs about your connection with Catholic schools, I guess your whole life.
Yeah, pretty much.
Does that define why you're so dedicated to the cause here and now?
I think, we have good schools, good public schools in the area, and the Catholic school is kind of a different slant on things. Sister Cordata talks all the time about our gift to the kids is the fact that we can also talk about gospel values inside the school. And while the public schools are good, they can't do that. So that's the important piece, and we hope to have those values sort of permeate through all the things that go on at the school. And it wasn't until later in life when I really started to think about some of the things that I learned while I was in those Catholic schools. And then, like I said upstairs,
it's a while to process that.
Yeah, to appreciate what's going on. While you're in school, you always have complaints about something or other that you don't like about a school. But later on, you remember the important things, and it comes out in different parts of your life.
We appreciate all your hard work for this cause, and we, as we've said so many times tonight, we hope this story has a happy ending.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think it will be an ending that will be crafted by the whole community, and that's where we're going.
That's great. Ed, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
I want to point out to our viewers of Hometown Cable that in no way should they misconstrue this program into thinking that we have launched some kind of indictment against the public school system here in northern New York. It's simply not the case. We were asked to be here tonight because we think it's an important thing for people to have choices. And for those people who are not Catholics, whose children may never become a part of this Catholic education system here in Plattsburgh in the North Country that we've been speaking about tonight, it is something you ought to pay a great deal of attention to, because what happens in this Catholic school system affects you and your pocketbook. And if you don't think so, may I underline and reiterate a point I made early in the program when I was interviewing Warren Lefty Tessier at the head of this program. If the Catholic schools did have to close and those children all went to your school system, believe me, it would make a difference in how you operate and how things operate. Wherever you are, pay attention to what happens in your children's schools. If you're interested in the way the Catholic schools operate in the future, as you can see, these people are extremely concerned about the process. Make your views known. Don't be one of those people that exercises your opinion around the supper table or at your neighborhood bar on the way home from work. Get involved in the process or don't complain. It's very simple. How this will turn out, we have no idea, but we hope at least by virtue of this program on our little corner that we've brightened your picture a little bit on the television screen. Talk it up and let these people know how you feel. And who knows where we're going to be next time.